he wrote a scathing article about dentistry years ago, and interestingly enough, I had to calm down after reading the article, and I wanted to write a rebuttal, so I waited about a day so I would hopefully write something that was positive. He got a few letters back. He printed some of the letters. Of course, I didn't want to be the guy who sent the letter that said, "I'd like to take my drill and put a hole in your head." So I did something positive for him, and then he printed my letter. And so about a month or so later, he was having a book signing. And so I went to get a book signed from him. And put my book. I walked up to him, and I told him who I was. And immediately at the top of his voice, started screaming for security. And if you've ever been around Lewis, you know that it's kind of hard to determine what's a joke and what's not. And so after I was taken back a little bit, and then when I was finished, I gave him a card, and I said, you know, if you ever want to give dentistry another chance, I'd like to show you that our profession is a lot better than you think it is. About 2 or 3 months later, he came to me as a patient. Of course, on his form to fill out, for the health issues, he didn't list everything down there that was wrong with him. On top of that, he listed his occupation as a typist. Yeah. So, but Lewis was incredibly funny in groups and behind a typewriter. For any of you who don't know what a typewriter is out there, you young guys, it's like a computer. He was not that funny one-on-one, and I think he wasn't funny one-on-one with me because he was terrified of the medical profession in any shape or form. Deep childhood-seated fear or whatever. He would not let anybody in my office clean his teeth but me, and it had to be under nitrous oxide. I mean, he was that terrified of dentistry. And unbeknownst to me, he had a defective heart valve. Well, Lewis had, he was so fearful of dentistry, he ended up, he had about 3 or 4, all 4 of his wisdom teeth were rotted to the gum line. They were just decayed. And if any of you understand anything about bacteria in the body, that's why periodontal disease is so important for heart disease. If you got that, you need to make sure you have it taken care of, because that's a precursor to have a heart attack, because the bacteria from your mouth infects your heart. So that's why if somebody has some sort of problem like that, we give them antibiotic coverage before we treat them. And so he came to me, and of course I did find out after questioning him that he did have heart problems, and so we put him on antibiotic coverage. But I said, Lewis, you need to get these wisdom teeth out, because you are just pumping bacteria in your system. It's going to affect you. And he wouldn't. He said, I'm not going to do it. I said, well, you know, it's a risk of your life. And so he ended up going on with that. The next thing I know is I read in the paper he's had the pig valve put in. Well, I called his physician up because I knew him, and I said, do you happen to know that he has 3 rotten teeth in his mouth? And I tell you what, you could have heard a pin drop on the other side of the phone. They never asked. They never checked. And he never told them. And I kept thinking I heard him shuffling on his desk looking for his insurance policy, because that's a liability, big-time liability. Well, of course, he came back after that, still wouldn't get his teeth out. And he's going around with a pig valve in his heart, and he didn't get it removed, his teeth removed. Right before he went to St. Petersburg, went to Russia, he came in to get checked, and he looked like death warmed over. And I told him, I said, Lewis, you don't need to be going to Russia. You're probably have bacterial endocarditis right now. And of course he left. And of course you know what happened. He got over there and he had to have a tooth pulled while he was over there. He was really sick, and came back home, and they put him back in the hospital, and they had to replace that pig valve. And that was the start of the decline of his health. Of course he drank too much, he smoked, he did everything else bad in his life too, but he did not take care of himself. And of course when I went to see him in the hospital, true to form, I walk into his room to see him, and after he'd been recovering, he started screaming that I was the one who caused all of his problems. And so I stood there and just gave him the evil stare for the longest time, and he got real sheepish and finally admitted to everybody in the room, he says, you know, he tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. So it just goes to show that small things like that, little things like that, can lead to big problems. And I'm sorry, you know, it's been 15 years this past March that he died. Hard to believe it's been that long. But, you know, it's unfortunate because he was a great writer, and I know all of us enjoyed his articles, and I'm sorry he's gone.
It's a great loss. Thank you very much. Good story. Compound interest. And so very small little mistakes we make can have a butterfly effect. They can begin to affect and erode and invade the rest of our lives. And again, this is to me just an illustration of things that we can all do in varying ways, where the permission of human freedom makes it possible for us to make dumb choices, which will affect us. And by the way, those dumb choices will affect others, because much of our pain and problem is caused by other people's choices as well as our own, whether a direct result of people's choices or not. It could be a drunk driver, it could be child abuse, it could be war. There are any number of things. It could even be related to the vulnerability of making choices to stay in an area which is known to be dangerous. And so that much of the problem we have, we know, for example, where there are going to be more likelihoods, greater likelihoods of mudslides, of earthquakes, and so forth. And people make choices that can eventually have a consequence. If the San Andreas Fault finally does do what it's definitely going to do, it's not a question of if, it's only a question of when, and it's on borrowed time, apparently. You can't go down raising the clenched fist against God and say, how could you allow this to happen? I mean, it's not like we do not have an idea of what could occur. You see my point here. I'm not minimizing this, but I'm saying that there are a lot of choices that people make that really lead to disasters, and many of those disasters would appear to be natural disasters, like famine and other things, and situations like this can be caused by human freedom. I'm suggesting then that the ultimate example of the consequences of human freedom is the Adamic fall, and that had a blast that had an enormous impact, and we're all affected by that. It's the nature of a physical world, by the way. We stop and think about it as well. If you're in a physical world, there will be these kinds of situations where there are mountains and hills. What does that mean? People can fall to their deaths. Where there are rivers and lakes, people can drown. You need tectonic activity in order for the world to actually sustain life. There are a variety of reasons why that's necessary, but tectonic activity can, in fact, produce tsunamis. It can produce all kinds of things, and volcanoes and also earthquakes, all these kinds of things. So we live and it's the nature of this kind of a physical world that we are in that also amplifies the possibilities of difficulty. There are certain fixed laws and consequences that unfold by natural necessity. So if you try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the order of nature and the existence of free wills involve, you're going to have excluded life itself. So you can see that there is this. We live in a risky world, and yeah, you can imagine a chess game where moves can be taken back. My sister used to do that with my father. I remember when she was playing chess with my father, she could always go to the bank. You know, because obviously she wasn't near as good, and he enjoyed that because it created new problems, you see. So she could change the rules of the game, then it was like a whole new game that he had to do. But it's really not the game of chess at that point. You see, it looks like chess, sounds like it, but it's not chess when you begin to change the rules that way. Now, there's something you could do. You can conceive of a world in which God could correct the results of the abuse of his creatures at any point. For example, at any point when a person wants to shoot somebody, God could turn the bullets into marshmallows. Or if you attempt to carry a lie or an insult, that the air could refuse to obey you, to create the sound waves that would carry the lies or the insults. And you could go on and on. Imagine millions of such possibilities. Suppose that every time someone wanted to do something wrong and tried to do something wrong, they were defeated because it was not allowed. What would that mean about human nature?